During tax season, you sit at your kitchen table, W-2 form in hand, calculating how much of your year you spent working for the government. You stayed late at the office, gave up your weekends, and lived under stress for 12 months. And in the end, you realized that for 3 or 4 of those months, you were essentially working entirely for the government. You probably feel a mix of both anger and helplessness because you have been told your whole life that paying taxes is the price of living in a civilized society. Then you open your phone and come across a headline showing that a billionaire pays a lower tax rate than you do. You see tech giants and real estate moguls living lavish lives while reporting almost zero income to the tax authorities. It feels unfair. The system seems rigged. And here is that uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to admit. The system really is rigged. Just not in the way you think. Not because they are breaking the laws, but because they are playing a completely different game with a completely different rulebook than the one you were taught in school. Most people think the path to wealth is to work hard, earn a high salary, and save what is left after taxes. But the wealthy know this. Earned income is the most heavily taxed money on earth. Trying to get rich through a salary is like running a marathon with a backpack full of bricks on your back. Today, I am going to tell you exactly how the top 1% opts out of the tax system entirely, the precise mechanism they use. This strategy is called buy, borrow, die. By the end of this talk, you will understand why your high salary might actually be a trap, and you will see how you can apply these billionaire strategies to your own life, even if you are not a billionaire yet. We are going to examine the 3 phases of this strategy one by one, and I will show you how to move from being a tax victim to a tax strategist. To understand why the wealthy do not pay taxes, you first need to grasp the fundamental difference between how you earn money and how they earn money. When you receive a salary, that money is taxed immediately before it even enters your account. The federal government takes its cut, the state government takes its cut, Social Security takes its cut. You are left trying to pay your bills and build a life with whatever remains. This is exactly what financial experts call the W-2 trap. You are converting your time into money, and that money is being taxed at the highest possible rates. The wealthy do not convert time into money. They convert money into assets. And this brings us to the first phase of the strategy, buy. The wealthy do not focus on income. They focus on net worth. They take their capital and invest it in appreciating assets like stocks, real estate, or businesses. Here is the critical distinction that most people miss. When you buy a stock or a piece of real estate and its value increases, you do not owe a single penny in taxes on that growth until you actually sell it. This is called an unrealized gain. You bought a share of Amazon for $100 and it went up to $1,000. You made $900 on paper. The tax authority cannot touch that $900. It just sits there continuing to grow with compound interest year after year, completely tax-free. This is why you see headlines about billionaires whose net worth increased by $10 billion in a single year, yet they paid zero income tax. Because that wealth is locked inside assets, not sitting as cash in a checking account. The wealthy know this. The moment you sell an asset, a taxable event is triggered, so they simply never sell. They let the snowball keep growing bigger and bigger. But this raises a very obvious question that is probably scratching at your mind right now. If all their money is tied up in stocks and buildings and they never sell anything, how do they cover their living expenses? How do they pay for the yachts, the villas, and the grocery shopping? If their wealth is nothing but numbers on a screen, this is exactly where we enter the second and most brilliant phase of the strategy, borrow. This part requires a mental reset because we have always been taught that debt is bad. We were taught that debt is slavery. But for the wealthy, debt is not a burden, it is a tool. It is a tax-free way to access their wealth. Instead of selling their stocks to get cash, which would generate a massive tax bill, they go to the bank and ask for a loan using their assets as collateral. This is commonly known as a securities-backed line of credit. The bank looks at their $10 million portfolio and says, of course, since we know you have the assets to back it up, we will lend you $5 million at a very low interest rate. The magic is right here. Loan proceeds are not taxable income. When the bank transfers that $5 million into their account, the tax authority sees zero income. That $5 million is completely tax-free spending power. They can live a lifestyle with that money that you can only dream of. And on paper, they appear to have no income at all. But you might be thinking about the interest. Do they not have to pay interest on that loan? Yes, they do. But the math is overwhelmingly in their favor. Let's say they pay 3 or 4% interest on the loan, but their investment portfolio continues to grow 8 or 10% a year. They are making a profit on the borrowed money. While their own money stays invested and continues to compound, they are living on the bank's money. This is called positive arbitrage. They are essentially earning money by borrowing money to continue living their lives. Compare this to your own situation. You sell your labor, pay 30 or 40% in taxes, and then try to invest what is left. They are skipping the tax step entirely and keeping their wealth working for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This brings us to the third and final phase of the strategy, die. I know that sounds grim, but the biggest tax loophole is hidden in estate planning. You might be wondering whether the accumulated debt will eventually come due if they keep borrowing and borrowing. The answer is both yes and no. When a wealthy person passes away, their heirs inherit the assets. And under current tax law, something incredible happens called the step-up in basis. This is the holy grail of tax avoidance. Let me explain how it works with a simple example. Let's say your grandmother bought a stock 50 years ago for $10 a share. Today, that stock is worth $500. If she had sold it the day before she died, she would have had to pay capital gains tax on that $490 profit. But when she dies and leaves it to you, the cost basis of that stock is reset to the current market value. The tax authority treats it as if you bought it for $500. All the capital gains tax liability that built up over 50 years simply evaporates. It disappears as if it never existed. You can sell that stock the next day for $500 and pay zero capital gains tax. This is how the cycle closes. The heirs inherit the assets tax-free thanks to the step-up in basis. They sell a small portion of those assets to pay off the loans that were taken out to fund the lifestyle. Because the basis was stepped up, they pay no tax on that sale. The debt is wiped clean and the family keeps the vast majority of the wealth, ready to start the cycle all over again. Buy assets, borrow against them, live and die to erase the tax bill. This is a perpetual wealth creation machine that completely bypasses the tax system that you and I are forced to participate in. This explains why wealth inequality is growing so rapidly. This explains why the middle class feels like it is running on a hamster wheel while the wealthy seem to be taking an elevator straight to the top. The tax code was written by the wealthy for the wealthy. It rewards capital and penalizes labor. If you work for money, you lose. If your money works for you, you win. It is that simple, and getting angry about it will not change your bank account. What will change your bank account is understanding these rules and figuring out how to apply them to your own life, even if you are not a billionaire. You might be thinking this sounds great for Jeff Bezos, but I cannot walk into a bank and ask for $1 million loan against my savings account. And you are right. You probably cannot do it at that scale yet. But the principles of buy, borrow, die can be applied by anyone who shifts their mindset from consumer to investor. The first step is to stop prioritizing paying off low-interest debt and start prioritizing accumulating, appreciating assets. Most people are obsessed with being debt-free. They throw every extra dollar they earn at their mortgage or their low-interest car loan. They think this is the path to freedom, but by doing that, they are trapping their equity in an asset they cannot eat and cannot spend. They are killing their liquidity. A wealthy person would never pay off a 3% mortgage early. They would take that extra cash and buy more assets. They would put it into an index fund or a rental property. They want their money growing at 8 or 10%, not saving 3%. They understand the concept of opportunity cost. Every dollar you use to pay down cheap debt is a dollar that is not out there working for you in the market. Let us look at home ownership through this lens. For the average person, their home is their biggest asset, but most people treat it like a piggy bank they are trying to fill up. The smart strategy is to treat it like a bank you can borrow from. As your home increases in value, you can use a home equity line of credit to access that cash tax-free without selling the house. You can then use that borrowed money to buy another rental property or to fund a business venture. You are borrowing against your asset to buy more assets. You are creating your own mini version of the buy, borrow, die strategy. You are using debt to expand your wealth rather than using your income to pay off debt. This requires a massive psychological shift. You have to stop being afraid of debt and start respecting it as a tool. There is good debt and there is bad debt. Bad debt is borrowing money to buy things that go down in value like cars, clothes, or vacations. That is consumer debt, and it will keep you poor forever. Good debt is borrowing money to buy assets that go up in value or generate income. Good debt makes you rich. The wealthy have almost no consumer debt, but they have massive amounts of investment debt. They are leveraged. They control huge amounts of assets with relatively little of their own cash. Another way to apply this is through your investment portfolio. If you have a taxable brokerage account, you can apply for margin privileges. This allows you to borrow against the value of your stocks. Of course, there are risks, and you need to be careful about margin calls where the bank forces you to sell when the market drops. But used conservatively, it is a way to access liquidity without triggering taxes. Instead of selling stocks to pay for a down payment on a house or to cover an emergency, you can borrow against your portfolio. You keep your stocks, you preserve your growth, and you avoid the capital gains tax. The trap that most people fall into is the liquidity trap. They keep their money in cash because they want to be able to access it. But cash is a terrible asset. It loses value to inflation every single year. The wealthy hold almost no cash. They hold assets. And because they know how to borrow against those assets, they have plenty of liquidity without holding cash. They have realized that in a modern financial system, access to credit is just as good as having cash in the bank. But it allows your net worth to grow much faster. This brings us to the concept of phantom income versus phantom debt. When you work a job, you have real income and real taxes. But when you own assets, you have phantom income, which is appreciation that you do not pay taxes on. The wealthy maximize phantom income. On the other hand, most middle-class people have phantom debt. They have liabilities like car leases and subscriptions that drain their wealth but do not appear on a balance sheet as traditional debt. You need to flip this equation. You want to accumulate assets that generate invisible tax-free growth and eliminate the lifestyle liabilities that drain your cash flow. We also need to talk about the role of inflation in this strategy. The buy, borrow, die strategy is actually a massive bet against the currency. When you borrow money, you are shorting the dollar. You are borrowing dollars today that are worth a certain amount and paying them back years later with dollars that are worth less due to inflation. If inflation is 3% a year and your loan interest rate is 3% a year, the real cost of that loan is zero. You are getting free money. The wealthy use inflation to erode the value of their debts while their assets rise in price with inflation. They are winning on both sides of the equation. The middle-class saver is losing on both sides. Their cash savings are being eaten by inflation, and they are not carrying the kind of good debt that gets cheaper over time. The wealthy are floating downstream while they are swimming upstream. You have to stop trying to save your way to wealth. You cannot save your way to wealth in a fiat currency system that is designed to inflate. You have to invest your way to wealth, and you have to use leverage to amplify those returns. I know this sounds risky, and it really is risky if you do not know what you are doing. Leverage cuts both ways. If you borrow money to buy assets and those assets drop in value, you can be wiped out. This is why the wealthy also focus heavily on risk management. They diversify, they have cash reserves, they do not over-leverage. They use debt strategically, not recklessly. You need to build a solid foundation before you start layering on leverage. You need an emergency fund. You need a steady income stream. But once you have laid the foundation, you have to stop playing it safe and start playing it smart. One of the most practical steps you can take right now is to look at your retirement accounts. While 401k and IRA accounts are great, they have limitations. You cannot easily borrow against them. The wealthy often build large taxable brokerage accounts specifically because of the flexibility they offer. A taxable account allows you to apply the buy, borrow, die strategy much more effectively than a retirement account where the government sets all the rules. If you are maxing out your 401k but have zero liquidity in a brokerage account, you might be locking yourself into a rigid system that limits your options. Think about the concept of tax drag. Every time you pay tax, you are losing part of your compounding engine. If you lose 30% of your gains to taxes every year over 40 years, that does not just reduce your wealth by 30%. It can reduce your final net worth by 50 or 60% because of the compounding loss on that tax money. The buy, borrow, die strategy is ultimately about eliminating tax drag. It is about keeping 100% of your capital working for you 100% of the time. It is the most efficient wealth-building method that exists. You need to change your identity. You have to stop seeing yourself as a worker and start seeing yourself as a capital allocator. A worker tries to increase their salary. A capital allocator tries to increase their assets. A worker tries to pay off debt. A capital allocator tries to manage debt. A worker is afraid of the tax authority. A capital allocator uses the tax code as a roadmap. The system is not going to change. The government is not going to fix this for you. If you wait for the laws to become fair, you will be waiting forever. You have to learn the rules of the game as it is played right now and play it to win. The beauty of this is that it does not require you to be a genius. It requires you to be disciplined and it requires you to be patient. It takes time to build the asset base required to make this work. If you have $500 in your portfolio, you cannot borrow against it tomorrow. But if you spend the next 10 years aggressively buying assets instead of buying liabilities, you will eventually reach a crossover point. You will reach a point where your assets can support your lifestyle. And when you reach that point, you will never have to sell. You will never have to pay the taxman. You will have achieved true financial freedom. Do not let the fear of debt keep you poor. Do not let the obsession with income blind you to the power of assets. Start small. Buy your first index fund. Buy your first rental property. Keep buying. Never sell. And when you need cash, learn how to access it without triggering a tax bill. This is the blueprint. This is how dynastic families have kept their wealth for generations. It is not a secret. It is just math. And now that you know the math, you have no excuse to keep playing the game the old way. Your future self is counting on you to stop working for money and start making money work for you. The tax code is a series of incentives. If you do what the government wants, which is invest and build businesses, you get rewarded. If you do what the government does not prioritize, which is just working a job, you get taxed. Align your financial behavior with the incentives of the system. Stop trying to swim upstream. Build your arc of assets and let the current of compound interest carry you to wealth.